Hey everyone, and welcome back. This deep dive is going to be pretty intense but important. We're going to be looking at an article called "Can God Heal My Marriage After Sexual Trauma? Discover the Path to Healing Together."
Mm.
We're going to be focusing on healing specifically within a marriage and specifically from a Christian perspective. And one thing that really stuck out to me in this article was how it starts
Yeah.
with this really powerful analogy,
Oh, yeah.
comparing the experience of rape to a physical violation,
Mm.
using these sharp, prickly tools.
Right. And I think it's so powerful because it really, it makes you confront the reality of that trauma, how it impacts not just the body,
Mm.
but also the spirit and the soul.
Yeah, and that's something I really appreciate about the article, too, is that it didn't just focus on, the pain and the hurt, but also talked about the lasting effects, like hyposexualization,
Mm.
which I'll admit I had to look that one up. But it basically means like a decreased desire for sex,
Yeah.
which makes total sense,
Right.
given the context. But what I found really interesting was that the article doesn't just dwell on the problem. It moves right into talking about solutions. And the first one is forgiveness.
Yeah. And that's where things get really interesting, I think. Because it's not just about, forgiving the abuser, which is already a huge step.
Right.
But the article talks about how forgiveness is crucial
Mhm.
for the individual who experienced the trauma and for the couple as
Yeah.
a whole.
Yeah, and it actually lays out a three-step process for this.
Mm.
So let's kind of unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
Step one is revisiting the traumatic experience, which I can imagine is like incredibly difficult and even triggering for some people.
Right.
So I'm curious from your perspective, like why is that revisiting step so important?
Well, I think it's about confronting the pain, not suppressing it. Right. It's like
Yeah.
if you have an infected wound, you can't just like put a Band-Aid over it and pretend it's not there. You have to like clean it out.
Mhm.
No matter how painful that process might be. And I think spiritually and psychologically, it's about acknowledging the reality of what happened, naming the harm that was done. And that's really the foundation for genuine healing.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so step two is expressing that pain and hurt caused by the aggressor. And the article even includes a sample prayer for this. And it is raw. It's like
Yeah.
it's very raw and honest.
And I think that rawness is so important because it's not about condoning the act or excusing the abuser, but this step is about reclaiming your voice. Trauma can often rob you of your agency, your ability to speak your truth. And so this is a way of taking that power back. And the article emphasizes, this doesn't have to be a literal face-to-face confrontation.
Okay.
It can be a private spiritual act, a way of releasing that pain and anger.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point, like finding what feels safe and empowering for you.
Yeah.
So then step three is declaring forgiveness and reclaiming what was stolen. It's almost like this act of defiance in a way. It's like refusing to let the trauma define you.
Exactly. It's about, shifting the narrative. Trauma can make you feel like a victim, powerless. But forgiveness is about choosing to move forward, stepping out of that victimhood and into a place of healing and wholeness. It's reclaiming your life, your future, and saying, this will not break me.
Powerful. Okay, so this is where things took a little bit of an unexpected turn for me when I was reading the article. It then suggests asking God for forgiveness.
Yeah, I can see why that might seem a little counterintuitive,
Yeah, like why would the victim need to ask for forgiveness?
Right.
But the way the article explains it is that, like, clinging to that anger and bitterness, while totally understandable, can actually hinder healing.
Right. It's like holding on to a hot coal.
Yeah.
It burns you more than it burns the other person.
And so this act of asking God for forgiveness is almost like releasing that burden.
Yeah, I think what's interesting here is this idea that unforgiveness, even when it's justified, can become a spiritual and emotional burden that blocks us from receiving the fullness of God's grace and healing.
I'm starting to see how these steps all kind of build on each other.
Yeah.
But forgiveness, while crucial, is just the beginning.
Right. Yeah.
The article then goes on to talk about the role of the Holy Spirit in healing and transformation.
Yeah.
So let's maybe dive into that a little bit more. What does that spiritual renewal, as the article calls it, look like practically?
Well, I think trauma often leaves us with these distorted perceptions of ourselves, the world, and even God, right? We might start to believe these lies about being unworthy or damaged or unlovable. And so spiritual renewal is about allowing the Holy Spirit to kind of reshape those perceptions, to replace those lies
Yeah.
with God's truth.
So it's about more than just like, reading a Bible verse or saying a prayer. It's about a much deeper internal transformation.
Exactly. It's about allowing the Holy Spirit to work
Mm-hmm.
in the deepest parts of our being, to heal those wounds that run really deep, soul deep. And this transformation, as the article points out, isn't just for the individual. It's for the couple as a whole.
And that leads perfectly into the next part, which is the advice for husbands. And I really like how the article frames this, focusing on Ephesians 5.25.
Yeah.
That verse about loving your wives as Christ loved the church. I mean, talk about high calling.
It is, and it really sets the tone for everything that follows.
Right.
It's not about, fixing your wife or minimizing her pain, but it's about loving her with that depth of compassion and sacrifice that reflects Christ's love for his people.
So what does that look like practically? Especially in a situation as sensitive as this.
Well, the article talks about, patience, prayer, gentleness, and interceding for healing. It's about creating that safe space for your wife to heal, to process her pain, and to rediscover intimacy at her own pace.
Yeah. And there's that beautiful reference to Proverbs 18.22 about finding a wife being a blessing from the Lord.
Right.
And it's just this beautiful reminder that even in the midst of all these challenges, there's still beauty there.
Absolutely. It's about holding on to hope, that vision of what your marriage can be, even when the path forward seems uncertain.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the impact of the trauma to the importance of forgiveness to that transformative power of the Holy Spirit. What are some of your key takeaways so far?
I think for me, it's the interconnectedness of it all. Forgiveness lays the groundwork. Spiritual renewal kind of empowers the healing. And then love, that deep Christ-like love, becomes the guiding force for the couple's journey. It's not about one person carrying the burden alone, but walking this path together, supporting each other, and really leaning on God's grace every step of the way.
That's a great summary. And I'm really curious to dive even deeper into some of the specific advice that the article gives, for both wives and husbands when it comes to rebuilding that intimacy within the marriage.
Let's do it. I think it's in those practical details that we can really start to see how healing unfolds, how, brokenness can make way for restoration and a love that is truly transformative.
Okay, so we talked about those, foundational aspects of healing.
Yeah.
That forgiveness, the spiritual renewal, and that deep Christ-like love. But now I want to get into the nitty-gritty. Like the practical advice that the article offers for rebuilding intimacy after sexual trauma, because I feel like that's really where the rubber meets the road.
Absolutely. And that's where things can get really tricky and sensitive.
Yeah.
And the article doesn't shy away from that. And it actually starts by addressing wives specifically, encouraging them on this journey of rediscovering purity and embracing healing.
Yeah. And it does that by highlighting Titus 1.15. To the pure, all things are pure.
Yeah.
And I'll admit, when I first read that, I was kind of like, huh. How does this connect?
It's a little bit of a head scratcher.
Right.
But I think when you think about it, trauma, especially sexual trauma, can really defile a woman's thoughts and emotions. And even her perception of men and marriage. It can make her feel impure, unworthy. And so the article, I think, uses this verse to remind women that true purity comes from God, not from external circumstances.
So it's about reclaiming that sense of purity.
Yeah.
Even after something so violating has happened.
Yes.
It's about understanding that your worth and your value is not defined by what happened to you.
Exactly. And it's recognizing that healing is possible, that God's grace can restore what was broken. And that's such a powerful message of hope, I think, for women who feel trapped in the aftermath of trauma. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, and then the article shifts gears and starts talking to husbands, offering guidance on how they can best support their wives on this journey. And again, it goes back to Ephesians 5.25.
Yeah.
That call to love your wives as Christ loved the church.
Right. And that's really the key, because it's not about the husband trying to fix his wife or rushing her healing process, but it's about embodying Christ's love, which is so patient, selfless, and deeply understanding.
So what does that look like practically?
Yeah.
How can husbands live out that kind of love?
Well, the article, I think, does a really good job of getting into specifics here. It starts by talking about patience, understanding that healing takes time. There's going to be ups and downs. And your wife's journey is her own.
Yeah.
And it also mentions prayer, praying for your wife, and with her,
Mm.
which, makes sense given that emphasis on spiritual renewal we talked about earlier.
Really. Prayer is so important. It's like inviting God into that process,
Yes.
seeking his guidance and his comfort. It's acknowledging that you can't do this on your own. You need God's grace.
Yeah.
The article also talks about gentleness,
Mm.
And the need for husbands to be incredibly sensitive to their wives' emotional states.
Mm.
And I imagine that's a lot easier said than done,
Yeah.
especially if a husband is feeling hurt
Yeah.
or rejected, by his wife's struggles with intimacy.
Absolutely. It's a really tough situation all around, and that's why I think the article specifically addresses, those feelings of rejection that husbands might be experiencing, acknowledging that it's okay to feel hurt and frustrated and even confused.
Yeah.
But it emphasizes that, a wife's withdrawal or her struggles with intimacy aren't a personal attack on her husband.
That's such a crucial distinction.
Yes.
It's about understanding that her responses are coming from a place of trauma, from fear and pain that can really easily resurface, especially in those intimate moments.
And that's where I think empathy becomes so important. And the article uses this really powerful analogy. It asks husbands to imagine their own bodies being violated in the most horrific way, powerless to stop it.
Wow, that's a tough image.
It is. But it's meant to kind of evoke a visceral understanding of what many women experience internally during rape. It's about getting husbands to connect with that level of violation, that shattering of safety and trust.
Yeah, and I think it's a good reminder that sexual trauma is not just a physical act, but it leaves deep emotional scars that can impact every area of a person's life,
Yes.
including their ability to connect intimately.
And for husbands, that means approaching intimacy with such sensitivity and patience,
Yeah.
And it's about putting your wife's needs first, even if that means taking things slowly, having those open conversations, and seeking professional guidance if needed.
Yeah. And that leads into a really important point the article makes, which is that, healing from sexual trauma isn't a solitary endeavor. It's very clear about this. It's a journey that a husband and wife have to embark on together.
And it goes back to that beautiful concept, in Genesis 2.24 about becoming one flesh. It's that reminder that in marriage, you're not two individuals facing this challenge separately.
Right.
You're a unit,
Right.
a team, and you face it together.
Yeah, it's about supporting each other, offering grace and understanding, remembering that you're on the same side. It's not about one person fixing the other, but walking this path of healing together, side by side.
And that's where I think those shared spiritual practices like prayer, fasting, and communion can play such a powerful role.
Yeah.
It's creating that sense of spiritual unity, seeking God's guidance and strength together.
And I love how the article emphasizes that healing isn't linear.
Oh, yeah.
There are going to be good days and bad days, steps forward and moments where you feel stuck.
Yeah.
And that's where the strength of that marital bond really comes in.
Absolutely.
Having that safe space to be vulnerable, to express those frustrations and those fears, knowing that your partners are there to support you, not to judge you.
Yeah.
It's about celebrating those victories, big and small, and offering comfort and encouragement when you inevitably have those setbacks.
Right.
So I'm really eager now to dive into, what the article says about rebuilding trust and intimacy, because those things feel like so incredibly fragile after such a traumatic experience.
Right. Let's dive in. I think it's in those details that we can really start to see the hope and the possibility of restoration, of a love that emerges even stronger, from the ashes of pain.
As we get into this last part of our deep dive, I'm struck by the hopefulness of this article.
Yeah.
We've covered so much difficult stuff, but it doesn't leave us in this place of despair.
Right.
It points us toward healing and restoration, even towards a love that can be even stronger because of what happened.
Yeah.
That's really what stood out to me, too, was just that it doesn't sugarcoat the challenges, but it also makes it clear that healing is possible, even in the most difficult situations.
And one of the ways it does that is by sharing the author's own story.
Right.
She and her husband, they found healing after 10 years of marriage. 10 years. I mean, if that's not a testament to perseverance and God's faithfulness, I don't know what is.
It's a powerful reminder that, healing takes time. There's no quick fix, no magic formula, but it's a journey that requires patience and commitment and a willingness to lean on God's grace every step of the way.
And the article actually gives some really concrete advice.
Yeah.
For couples who are trying to rebuild that intimacy and that trust, which I imagine are incredibly fragile,
Oh, for sure.
after experiencing something like this.
Right. Those are the cornerstones
Yes.
of any healthy relationship. But they become even more crucial, I think, in this context. And so the article really emphasizes the importance of, open and honest communication, creating that space where both partners can feel safe to share their feelings and their needs.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of couples struggle, even without this added layer of difficulty. It's hard to be vulnerable, to express those deep fears and insecurities.
It is, and that's why, the article, I think, stresses the need for creating like a judgment-free zone where both partners can feel like they can speak their truth without fear of, criticism or rejection. It's about rebuilding trust.
Yeah.
Like brick by brick.
And sometimes that might even mean like getting professional help.
Yes.
The article acknowledges that healing from sexual trauma can be really complex,
right.
And it might benefit from talking to a therapist or a counselor.
And I think that's so important. There's no shame in asking for help, acknowledging that you need support. In fact, it's a sign of strength. It's a sign of a willingness to do whatever it takes to heal and grow.
Absolutely. And alongside that, the article talks about prayer, both individually and as a couple.
Yeah.
Encouraging couples to bring their pain, their fear, their hopes to God, and to seek his healing and guidance.
And that's just such a good reminder that, we're not alone in this. Prayer connects us to a source of strength and comfort that's so much greater than ourselves. Yeah.
One thing that strikes me as I think about this article
Yeah.
is its emphasis on both personal responsibility and reliance on God's grace. It encourages individuals to really actively participate in their own healing.
Right.
But at the same time, recognizing that we can't do it on our own.
Yeah, it's this beautiful balance. It recognizes our human limitations, but also empowers us to really, take ownership of our healing journey.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, what is like one thought you want to leave with our listener today?
The article really focused on forgiveness towards the abuser, but how might forgiveness of oneself play a role in this whole process? What about forgiving yourself for any perceived failings,
right,
or for holding on to the pain for so long? I think that's a really important question to consider.
That's such a good point. It's a reminder that healing has so many layers.
Yeah.
And it involves not just forgiving others, but also extending that same grace to ourselves. And as we close, I just want to say thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's been insightful and encouraging. Remember, healing is possible, and you are not alone on this journey.